Hello friends, welcome. My name is Juliana. I am here to talk to you about the gene keys, the gates, and how the current energy transit, how you can use it for transformation and to help in the evolutionary transformation of the planet. So today, we're going to talk about Gate 41. And Gate 41 this is what begins the Human Design New Year. And this year it falls on January 22nd. It's also directly related to the Lunar New Year in Chinese astrology. So this is where the I Ching is connected to astrology and how human design and the gene keys use it. So we'll start with the human design side and then we'll move to the gene keys. So in the human design body graph, Gate 41 is located in the root and it's connected to the emotional solar plexus through Gate 30. The circuitry of this gate is collective and sensing. So it's the bigger picture of what's happening in the collective. And it's more of like a knowing, it senses things as opposed to a logical understanding. And it's in the astrological sign of Aquarius. So the name of this gate in quantum human design language is imagination. In traditional human design language, it's fantasy. And in the I Ching, it is known as decrease. And so if you think of it, because it's at the beginning of the Lunar New Year, the Human Design New Year, it's really that desire to start something new. It's that creative spark that we get, right? That's like, oh, I have this idea. Oh, I want to go on this new journey. And it's related to a feeling, a sensed feeling, right? Because it connects to the emotional solar plexus. So it's that energy of the root center, the adrenaline of the root center that pushes us towards creating something new based on what feels right, what feels good. And it's this ability to use your creative imagination to generate ideas by tapping into what is known as the morphogenetic field. And this is something that has been discussed and made to be more known by a man called Rupert Sheldrake. If you're interested in that, I would highly recommend going and looking him up. The morphogenetic field connects us to universal wisdom, to wisdom that exists on the other side of the planet in another human being and what they have learned. And so when we tap into this morphogenetic field, we are then able to use our own individual creative imagination to create something new. This gate is also really calling us to honor our hopes and dreams and take action when the time is right. So the root center is all about divine timing. It's all about knowing the right time. It pulses on and off. And so what can happen is, excuse me, there is a pressure in the root center that pushes us to act too soon. And this can be a challenge with this gate and with this transit, that we act too soon out of restlessness, especially if you have an open root center. You are more prone to feeling that adrenalized energy and needing to move forward and create. On the other end of the spectrum, there's a challenge to not act, to deny right timing, and to remain living in your dreams out of fear. And we often will live in our dreams because it's safer than actually manifesting, making something manifest into the physical world. And that fear is often associated to us fixing on worst case scenarios. What might happen if I share something? What might happen if I sign up for something? What might happen if I tell someone I love them, right? We focus on the worst case scenarios. Another challenge is to also deny the creative power that is available to you. And I think this is very, very common in this human psyche, is that we're quite cut off from our own individual power, because we're often cut off to our connection to the divine, to the universe, to the morphogenetic field, whatever you want to call it, to the quantum field. And so that challenge is to really begin to understand that you are the creator of your existence. You are here to create. That's why we incarnate into these bodies. We are here to create through our imagination and our emotions, and to tap into the right timing in the physical plane to actually make them manifest. And so this gate 41, is really calling us to turn to what scares us. What scares you? What are you afraid is going to happen if you put your creative ideas out into the world? And whenever we are called to turn towards our fear, to step through fear, this is shadow work. Whenever we move through anything that is scaring us, we are confronted with our own shadows and the shadows of the collective. So if we move on to the gene key, the interpretation of the gene key, this is what's known in the gene keys as the start codon, and it's related to our genetic coding, where there's a specific sequence that signifies to the body to begin building. It's kind of like a key that begins this sequence of life. And on a different sense, it reminds me of a seed, right? You have a little tiny little seed, and that little seed is holding all the genetic coding to then produce fruit or grow into a big, massive tree. So this is the power of gene key 41. So in the shadow aspect of this gene key, Richard Rudd has named this fantasy, the shadow of fantasy. And we see this in the world quite regularly, where we see most people around us dreaming of creating a better life for themselves. But what happens is they never really seem to be able to do it, right? They keep repeating the same patterns. They stay where they are in their life because of whatever reason, right? They stay in this dream of having a more abundant, joyful, easeful life. And this dream, this fantasy, it comes from our genetic pressure to evolve, right? We are at the root of everything. Our bodies are related to mammals. We are very primal in some aspects of ourselves, and everything on this planet is under pressure for evolution based on conditions that each organism is experiencing. And so if there's a pressure for evolution at a lower frequency in humanity, it becomes interpreted as the pressure to feel happy, right? Where we're always seeking something to fulfill us, always seeking something to fill a void, to be happy, right? I see this a lot in with the clients that I work with. Is it's like, oh, I'm not happy. Everyone else is happy. I should be happy. And while yes, it's great to feel joyful and happiness, that's kind of like the fantasy of fairy tales where they live happily ever after and nothing else ever happens. That's not going to happen on this planet. It's just not in our lifetime, at least I think. So this pressure to be attached to this happiness can be linked to the idea of the wheel of samsara, which is known in Sanskrit. And it is this endless cycle of death and rebirth where we're continually driven by our senses and the need to satisfy our desires. And that desire is very closely linked to our ancestral weight of that desire to evolve, to change and better ourselves, which stimulates our hunger for a better future. And this constant like moving back and forth going, I need to improve, I need to improve, I need to improve, and feeling this desire through our senses that where we are is not enough, it gets exhausting, and we end up sitting in this space of like wanting, or this back and forth between, okay, now I have what I wanted. So for example, I'll just use food for example, right? You're hungry, that's your sense. You eat, and you're so hungry you eat a lot, and then you're full, and then you don't feel good, and you want to be empty. So it's this continuous loop of never really being satisfied where you are. When we're full, we want to release, and when we're empty, we want to fill ourselves up. That's all attachment through our senses. And that attachment is all caused by our minds and its fantasy, the mind's fantasy for wanting something that it doesn't have. And the mind has this brilliant way of living in the future or the past instead of in this now moment. So this continual grasping, right, for something we don't have, the continual desire for, that grass is always greener metaphor, right? That keeps us living in this wheel of samsara, or this illusion that something is always better once we have something, once we fulfill something through our senses. So to move into the gift of anticipation, we first have to understand the meaning of equanimity. And this is a word that one of my yoga teachers in Ashtanga used to use a lot. He would always say, find equanimity in each asana, in each posture. And equanimity is to have this unattached viewpoint about what anything looks like or feels like. So it's almost like you're creating a distance from your senses, and you're not judging anything as good or bad. And in order to tap into equanimity, we have to learn to find stillness in the mind. Right? You think of your mind. It is busy. That's its job. The mind's job is to reason things, gather information, to make sense of our world, to make sense of problems that are in front of us, to create new things. It has a great job. But what has happened in our evolution is that we've given the logical mind kind of the driver's seat. We've put the logical mind in the driver's seat of our existence and our experience. And in order to tap into this greater wisdom that's available to us in the gift of anticipation, and in order to tap into this energy of equanimity, we need to learn how to find stillness in the mind. And when we find stillness in the mind, that's when we actually can tap into the greater wisdom that's available to us in the morphogenetic field, this invisible energy grid that connects all of us to each other and communicates information. And so as we raise our frequency, right, by finding equanimity in the mind, by finding unattachment to our emotions, by choosing not to go back and forth between good and bad, empty and full, we begin to find equal response to what we're experiencing. So for example, I remember when I used to practice Bikram yoga, it's very hot, right? It's very hot. The mind hated that heat. It would say to me all the time, what are you doing in here? Get out of here. This is too hard. Blah, 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 over and over and over and over and over again. And I had to learn to find equanimity in that heat while sweat is dripping down my body, right? While it's hot, while I'm flushed. I needed to be okay with being in that discomfort. And so that anticipation, right? It's like we then become this open vessel to receiving the right information, the wisdom, and the right timing and the right knowing that's going to propel us forward on our evolution. We tap into knowing when it's time to act and knowing when it's time to pause. We begin to cultivate a trust in the natural ebbs and flows in life because we're no longer in reaction to our senses, right? Our reasoning logic brain no longer runs the show. That monkey mind is no longer turning. We're no longer attached to the good and the bad. And we can find this equanimity in our experience and tap into that knowing of what is for us, what is not for us, and trusting in our inherent connection to everything that is unseen. So during this transit, this is a time to watch for your own self-doubt. You might find your self-doubt, that fear, getting a little bit louder. It's also a time to watch where you might be living in your dream world, in fantasy. And it's also time to watch where is your mind looking for something to fulfill an empty hole, an empty space in you. And so it's really calling us to practice quieting the mind so that we can tap into our inner knowing. It's also allowing what no longer works for us to fall away so that what wants to be born to come in. So watch for things that are no longer working. Maybe they aren't meant to be working anymore. And then it's time also for you to practice asking the universe what your right next step is for you, not what anyone else is doing. And so as you begin to do this practice, right, and as you begin to tap into right timing, right knowing, universal wisdom, your own innate wisdom, that then ripples out into the collective, where our collective world begins to trust more in the natural ebbs and flows of life. Our world begins to know that fear is an illusion unless there is an immediate threat to my physical body. Fear is only an illusion. Can we trust that we are connected to the whole? Can we trust that sometimes it's time to release what's no longer working, just like the trees release their leaves? Sometimes it's the right time to go within, into darkness, into rest, just like in the wintertime, right? And then other times it's time to send those shoots of newness, those new ideas forward so that we can flourish again. So this is the power of you individually tapping in to the wisdom available to you here in this archetypal energy of Gene Key or Gate 41. So I wish you well. If you have anything to share, I would love to hear in the comment section. And if you like this video, please like it or subscribe. I would really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching.